You're listening to Criticaleye's Inspiring Leaders podcast. Criticaleye is a global membership community with over 2 decades of experience supporting senior executives in their roles. We work with board-level executives, giving them opportunities to build their knowledge, skills, and access independent reference points outside of their immediate networks. Whether you're stepping up into a more senior role or aspiring to do so, looking to hone high-level stakeholder relationships, drive operational performance, build your own personal resilience as a leader, or have longer-term career goals such as moving into a plural career, Criticaleye's approach supports a range of leadership challenges and ambitions. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Criticaleye podcast, part of our Inspiring Leaders series where we look at what it means to be a highly effective leader in today's climate and invite high-profile chairs, non-executives and executives on to share their views. My name is Julia Brooke, Marketing and Communications Director at Criticaleye, and I'm pleased to be hosting today's episode. I'm delighted to welcome 2 returning guests onto the podcast today to talk about the risks that will be on the board agenda this year. Both board mentors, Sally Bridgeland is Chair of the Development Bank of Wales, Nest Invest, BelleVie Care, and a non-executive director at Pension Insurance Corporation and Intact UK. Keith Cochrane is the current chair and former CEO of Schenck Process Group. He is additionally a non-executive director and former chair at Score Group. Welcome and thanks for being on the podcast, Sally, Keith. I should also say that as Criticaleye Board Mentors, our listeners can read more about you on our website, but perhaps we'll start with a bit more in the way of introduction. So can I come to you first, Sally, and can you expand upon my introduction?
Thanks very much. So I'm an actuary, 20 years consultant, chief executive of the BP Pension Fund for 7 years and lived through 3 crises there, including the global financial crisis and the Gulf of Mexico tragedy. For the last 12 years, I've been non-executive trustees of a variety of roles, usually financial services, but BelleVie Care, which you mentioned just now, is a bit of an exception and plays to the passion that I've got for quality of life in old age.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Keith, welcome also to the podcast again. Welcome back, I should say.
Thank you.
Would you like to do a bit more introduction of yourself?
Yes, I'm a chartered accountant by background. I've had a range of business experiences, I guess, covering public, private equity, family-owned businesses, regulated to international businesses as well. Embracing the CFO role, the CEO role, and then more recently a chair role as well.
Okay, thank you very much both. So I suppose the episode today we're looking at risk, and I suppose the first question just to throw over to both of you is what risk trends do you think are going to shape the board agenda in 2026? Who wants to kick off with that one? Sally, you go for it.
Thanks very much. I think we've got a risk on our risk register at the Development Bank of Wales, which is called interface risk. And I think that's going to be really important in 2026. It's the risk that something from the outside or something doesn't join up quite right. So whether it's governments, whether it's a group or an ownership structure, whether it's silos within an organisation, whether it's markets outside of relationships, presidents doing things you're not expecting, just that the stuff that comes from not understanding fully or a sort of gap in communication between one group and another, I think that's going to be really important. It's also vitally important when you're rolling out big technology projects that have been designed somewhere and have to be embedded somewhere else. Do people really understand what that's all about? So those risks of the pilot purgatory we were talking about in the mental retreat. How do you get through that without it being too painful for the organisation?
You mentioned cyber a minute ago, and I think we've obviously had quite a few high-profile cases, haven't we, recently? And I know what you were saying, Keith, about there's some things you can't foresee and you can't anticipate. You can plan for them or scenarios maybe, but not always the exact kind of risk coming down the line. But it'd be interesting from both your perspectives and considering some of the things in the press recently about companies that have kind of struggled with this, like how do board members, how do non-executives stay informed in a rapidly evolving threat landscape? And there was something this morning, wasn't there, that we as you were saying, we're at the Board Mentor Away Day around keeping current, keeping up to date, and then what does that look like in the context of cyber threats? Who wants to take that one first?
I think clearly we're both coming at it from a sort of non-executive perspective.
Yeah.
So I think it behoves both ourselves individually and the companies that we work with to ensure that the board has awareness of latest trends and developments within the world of cyber. To give that as a specific example, you could say the same principle applied actually to other risk areas as well, but take cyber as the example. So I think it's almost a two-pronged approach from my point of view, and it's about being aware, having exposure to developing trends across those themes, understanding what has happened in some of the specific cases that have arisen,
right,
and therefore, and then working with your executive colleagues as to if the same thing happened to us, again it's back to the scenario planning, isn't it? It's thinking about if that happened to us in that set of circumstances, what would we do? What are some of the new cyber themes? Because we think of cyber as just one, almost one issue, as if there's only one way that your business is going to be attacked cyber-wise. Right. There are probably multiple different ways that can, that people are always looking for the weak link. Yeah. That's what cyber actors are trying to do. So it's how do you continually test and challenge where your own business weak links are. Yeah. Some of that will be maybe third party engagement as well. Yeah. But I think part of it is by having the board focused on those topics and having enough knowledge to be able to ask at least the right questions, or ensure that they're getting exposure to the right people who can help, inform the debate and inform the business awareness and ability to both stop and react.
Yeah, absolutely. And is that the kind of same approach for you, Sally,
would
you say?
I think it's my turn to agree with absolutely everything that Keith said. I think the non-executive perspective is not about the buzzwords and really understanding how this happened, but very much the so what, and could it happen to us, and what would we do if. So it is around those scenarios, but I think the reality of cyber attacks and things like phishing, which is getting more and more sophisticated, is there are other symptoms of an organisation's risk to cyber attack getting elevated if people are too busy, if there's too much operational stress. They don't think hard enough, and so they press on the button, or they're worried about their jobs, or there's anxiety in the business generally. Yeah. So, or if there's cultural differences, I find it absolutely fascinating as a non-executive when you look at how much response do we get to a phishing attack in two different organisations. The one that was a deeply sceptical, critical kind of organisation, very good results against the phishing test. The consumer services part of another organisation always want to be helpful. Yeah. They're much more vulnerable to those. So it means that you have different approaches to training, to the cultural response, to what do we need to do to improve our resilience. Yeah. So there isn't really a standard formula, but there are different patterns that fit different organisations to help respond to that.
Yeah, so interesting, and it sounds like it's something that is very high on the agenda, obviously, for your guys' boards as well. So, I think looking beyond cyber, the world just generally is quite there's quite a lot going on at the moment, isn't there, in geopolitics, international trade, things like tariffs, supply chain disruption. There's so many risks. So how do you even start thinking about some of those things? I'd be interested to get a little bit of an idea of how it kind of comes up and how the discussion goes on in the boardroom.
I think it starts by ensuring that the board and through the executive are able to articulate and have a clear understanding of what your business model is, and back to what I was saying earlier, what are the key influences and drivers impacting that business model?
Okay.
You know, I've seen a number of situations where, take supply chain disruption as an example, where a tier 2 or a tier 3 supplier has had an issue, and before we know it, that becomes a critical, you know, issue for ourselves in terms of, you know, deliveries and meeting, you know, our customer demands. So I think it's trying to, you know, encourage the executive and be aware ourselves of those interdependencies that exists. You know, one of the themes that I think has become very much to the fore over the last 12 months has been, you know, a move away or a debate at least around the validity of global supply chains, as an example, and the threats versus the benefits that come from them in a world that is potentially moving backwards from a globalization era.
Yeah.
So I think it's understanding those, it's understanding what are the critical dependencies around supplies, around markets, around customers, and then, you know, coming up with, as we talked about earlier, realistic scenarios that can be stress tested and can become a basis for debate and discussion around the boardroom table as to how you would react. Because often, you know, the left field event in itself, you know, it has to be dealt with, but it's the real effects of that are about how quickly you react and how responsive and agile. So it's about trying to do, and you can never do it all, but trying to do some of the thinking, some of the heavy lifting in advance, so you're not starting with a complete blank sheet of paper and not quite knowing what to do. Because again, back to this bandwidth point, an organization is trying to do a lot of things, both in terms of day-to-day delivery, you know, undoubtedly trying to move forward its strategic vision, but then something happens. And there is a limit, let's recognize it, as to what people can do and how many things they can deal with at any point in time. So having done some of the basic legwork up front, I think can make a huge difference and just give you a bit of an elevated starting point in which to take on the next challenge.
So it's more about preparing for the unexpected than actually anticipating exactly what those kind
yes,
of disruption
you know,
points are going to
the
be.
fact it's unexpected mean, you know, we can't always.
Right.
Some of the things that have happened, none of us would have thought we would have. Would have happened. Yeah, let's be honest. You know, we're not even in the known unknowns category.
Right.
We're beyond that. You know, but yeah, again, I think the one thing I think that has emerged is I think we all have to recognise we are in a world of more volatility. So it is forcing boards and executives to think about those unknowns and think about what those weak links could be in the context of their own business.
Yeah. What do you think, Sally? Is that...
Yeah, I think in terms of how boards should approach those external risks, the reality is if I look back over my 40-year career, there's always been things like this. You know, when I was at school, when there were 3-day weeks and you couldn't go to school, you know, more than 3 days which was fantastic as a school kid, and the miners' strikes and the oil crisis and there's always been that stuff. So part of it, I think, is the board helping the team keep calm and carry on, because just because the volume is louder doesn't mean the impact on the business and the business model is going to be any more extreme. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be systematic.
Okay.
And there are two particular things. So in insurance, we're very hot on emerging risks, writing down a list of what happens if, whether it's the Scottish referendum or whether it's war here. Let's write that down and think about the so what. Actually, what would that mean for the business?
Okay.
And you usually find that there's a need for some kind of crisis response committee, and it certainly happened at BP a year on from the Gulf of Mexico tragedy.
Right.
Our board got together And our chair at the time, and I remember this, and I'm quite happy doing it on other people, just came back from the lunch break, said, it's happened, there's been a third strike, which is what we call the what happens if there's another accident now.
Okay.
What do we do? And we brainstormed what we needed to talk about, and we started talking about it before he revealed that he was winding us all up. And forming a crisis response committee, or having that governance muscle in place, that means that you know which buttons you would press if you need to press buttons, who's going to be around the table, just gives everybody that confidence. And again, in insurance companies, we do that as part of the recovery and resilience planning, including down to a playbook of what would happen in a crisis. And I would thoroughly recommend that to any business.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. You both mentioned there around kind of working with executives, so I'm going to come to that now, if that's okay. In terms of how you think the board can provide guidance to executives as they navigate all these emerging risks. And I take your point, Sally, about the fact that there's always been risks, and there were risks before and there are risks now. I don't know why we always feel that they seem bigger now than maybe they were previously, but how does the board kind of work alongside the executives or support the executives so they are continuing to make the right strategic decisions for the business in the context of different risks coming up when they do? Who wants to go first with that one? Sally, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. I think the atmosphere and the culture around the board table, so it's, as a chair, what I'm looking for is moving on from the sort of almost judgmental challenge, let's find a mistake in what the executives have said and prove them wrong, to across the table, I'm waving my hands around, which is no good for a podcast whatsoever, but if you imagine my two hands opposite each other, and the executive on one side of the table and the non-executive on the other side of the table, I think in the current environment we need to be much better at being on the same side of the table and moving forward together. Now I've got my hands overlapping each other and moving in the same direction off into the sunny uplands, being supportive, support as you said, but being constructive and being curious, being genuinely open to understand how they see things. Yeah. Because I think encouraging that spirit of curiosity helps the executive get more benefit and more value from the non-executives, from the scars that we've had, from the crises and the risks that we've seen emerge, which I think will make companies more resilient too.
No, I think completely agree. I think that's right. I think as a board, it's about creating the context in the board agenda and the space in the board agenda to enable you to focus on looking forward rather than necessarily. A lot of board agenda is focused on looking back, but for me the real value add is about creating the space to look forward, to understand and to bring to life the risk environment that the business is facing, and to spend time where the executive can leverage the very broad experience that undoubtedly sitting around the boardroom table is part of the reason directors are chosen, because they bring different skill sets and experiences and backgrounds, and it's actually creating a context environment where that can really come into play for the benefit of the broader organisation, and in a sense the non-executives are alongside the executive, and I brought my hands together now as well, are alongside working to work through these things as a collective team, but very much focused about the look forward rather than necessarily, yes, you've got to, if the issues happen, then the crisis committee, how you react, take advantage of everybody's experience, absolutely. But having the debate and preparing the ground for the unknown is something that I think the collective broad experience of a board plus the executive can add real value.
Absolutely, thank you. Just a couple more questions I have, if that's okay. And one I wanted to talk about was about kind of growing regulatory demands that are on boards. How can boards ensure risk oversight remains proportionate, strategic and aligned with long-term executives in that context? And I think I'm going to come to Keith first, if that's okay.
Well, I think really building on what I said just a few moments ago, I think it's behove the board, the chair has a particular role in this context as being, in charge of the agenda, as it were, is to ensure that the debate around risk is a live debate. It's not a sort of historic risk register.
Okay.
It permeates all facets of the business, in terms of stress testing, as we heard earlier, different strategy scenarios, in terms of major investment decisions, in terms of actually the people agenda as well. How do we ensure that we have the right skills and capabilities for, one of the challenges right now is the movement of management between different countries for individual business is becoming more challenging in some instances. So how do you address some of the people linked issues? And it's about creating space in the boardroom discussion to enable these conversations to be had, and to putting in place a framework, as I said, of and agreeing a set of maybe metrics forward indicate what are those key metrics that are relevant that for the known unknowns that potentially we can seek to track that could have a significant influence on our business, and using them as a sort of reference point for our management of risk on a real-time basis.
Thank you. Sally?
No, I think it's a really important question around how you make sure that the regulatory demands don't dominate the conversation, because usually regulatory demands are about avoiding bad stuff, and the business and the board are about making sure that good outcomes happen for shareholders, other stakeholders, employees, everybody listed in section 172 of the Companies Act, not just the regulators. So you need to make sure that you've got, as Keith said, the space to have the conversations that you need to have, which means it's less about making the reports and the metrics mechanistic and easy to do so that we can trigger the right conversations, rather than spending too much time over engineering. And there are all kinds of jokes about actuaries, so I'll save Keith from wheeling them out. But there's the ask an actuary the time and they'll tell you how to build a watch.
Yeah.
The danger is that you go into all the innards of something when actually you just need that headline thing. And if it's green on the risk register, we don't need to talk about it, because we've already talked about what amber and red look like. But having it there, you still have to have it there, so make that as painless as possible for the organisation to produce. And I think that's where technology and AI can actually be quite helpful in reducing the administrative burden on making sure that we are actually monitoring things correctly.
Absolutely, we haven't actually touched upon that, have we? And that's obviously a big thing probably that boards are kind of looking at as well. But I am conscious of time, and I did have just one final question. You've both mentioned about kind of crisis committees and the risk committee. Specifically for this question, but what role should the board play rather in the risk committee to ensure its work strengthens oversight and supports long-term organisational resilience? I know we've touched upon this quite a few times at different points of the conversation, but it'd be good to just finish with what your thoughts are on how the board should be kind of aligning with the risk committee.
I think the most important thing is, and you don't have to be a group captain in the Air Force to talk about altitude, but it is acting at the right altitude, but being able to go down into the detail but up to the right level, and making sure that everything that you're talking about, you're picking the right altitude. That's really where the risk committee can help the board stay at the top level, and can dive down deep if it needs to in particular issues that come. So really that's the job of the risk committee, is joining the dots between risks that are really hitting and are important for the executive and the strategic implications for the board.
Thank you. Keith?
Yes, no, I think I would agree with that as well. But alongside that, I would also see the risk committee's got a role to get behind the stated risks in terms of ensuring it has adequate assurance around the scenarios that would play out have been tested. You know, is there a role for third party assurance in terms of specific elements of risk assessments? So it's being prepared to ask the right questions to give itself the comfort that, you know, what is below the surface has got substance.
Okay.
It's very easy, you know, probably AI could generate a risk, you know, register or format for your reactions, but is it skin deep or does it have substance? And I think that's part of the thing. And that doesn't necessarily always mean third party assurance. It could mean just ensuring that the risk committee has exposure, or you get the right people from across the business to come and talk about, or having the output from maybe some of the scenarios that have been tested in real life across the business, to give some assurance that, again, it's real.
Okay.
And it's not just a piece of paper there to placate the board.
Sally, Keith, thank you so much for sharing with our listeners on this episode, and thank you to our listeners. All of Criticaleye's podcasts can be found on Podbean, Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For more on how we support leaders and our tailored programmes for senior executives, please visit our website www.criticaleye.com. Obviously look out for more episodes from Criticaleye soon, but in the meantime, thank you both, and we hope to have you back on the podcast very soon.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.